Shinzo Abe was mid-speech when suddenly 2 shots rang out. His security tackled the gunman immediately, but it was too late.
You can see in that video, of course, both one of the shots that were fired by an apparently homemade weapon against the former Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe. You saw the man being tackled. Unfortunately, what happened not that many hours after that was Abe, who had been struck by the weapon, was rushed to the hospital but died around 5 p.m. local time. And in this segment, we're going to talk a little bit about what we know about the assailant, the killer in this instance. Talk a little bit about the context of firearms laws in Japan. But we also wanted to briefly let you know a bit about Abe in case, for our largely American audience, you might not be familiar with the politician who was struck down. He gained prominence initially in national politics in Japan in the early 2000s. First became prime minister back in 2006, but resigned just a year later. He was eventually, when he returned to politics, Japan's longest serving prime minister, resigned not long ago in September of 2020 due to health problems. But as you saw in that video, he was speaking at a campaign rally. Despite resigning as prime minister, he remained active and influential in politics there. And for Japan, obviously, this is an incredibly significant thing. Political violence anywhere is violence of any type with guns is so rare there that this is even more shocking, I think. Police have since arrested the suspected shooter, a 41-year-old. It's a former Japanese Navy member, apparently had some sort of issue with Abe. There were references to Abe being involved with some sort of organization that wasn't specified that this man apparently had a problem with. They say it wasn't due to political differences. Always take any sort of claims about motivations in the initial aftermath of violence with a massive grain of salt. But you can see the individual there, and you can also see the weapon that was used in the lower right-hand corner of the frame. If it looks, shoddy, haphazard, that's because it was. It's pipes and a board duct taped together. Apparently 2 metal barrels attached to a wooden board about a foot long. And so we're gonna talk about gun laws there, and we're also gonna talk about the prevalence of violence, but I wanna make sure that both of you got a chance to talk about the fact that a former world leader was shot and killed.
Yeah, it's shocking to see an assassination these days. So my first thought, honestly, was that, he's a former prime minister and he's at a political rally. That's weird, because here in America, we're used to, at least I'm used to Obama, who hey, once you're done, you just go into a cave or a mansion and a yacht.
You're paying it.
And you protect your legacy, right? George W. Bush did that, Obama did that. Or if you're Trump, you just whine all day long, I won, right? So, but our former leaders honestly don't care enough about policy to actually be at a rally to fight for anything. That's why I was double surprised. So give Abe credit on that he cared enough to keep going, and he had significant health problems. Now, Abe in Japan's politics is right wing, okay? And he was known as a nationalist. Now remember, context, international context is very important here. There's some countries where they have real right wingers in charge. Brazil and India are good examples, but most of the developed world is so much more liberal, progressive, left wing than us. So Abe as a right winger in Japan probably was to the left of AOC here, okay? So because we're so conservative in America, we're so insanely right wing, not the people. The polling indicates that people are very progressive, but our politicians are so intensely right wing that it would be surprising that, other than the slight nationalism that Abe had, if he wasn't way more left wing than the most left wing Democrat here. And that says nothing about Japan, it says everything about America. Now, the guy who killed him, well, 9 out of 10 times, maybe 98 out of 100 times, these type of terrorists are right wingers. And so this is when the right wing, no, that's outrageous, what do you mean? Well, first of all, this guy, turns out he's like, I didn't like his certain religious group he was in. Yeah, a religious fundamentalist nut who wanted to kill based on religion. By the way, the right wing in the Muslim world is called Al-Qaeda, Taliban, and ISIS. That's the right wing of the Muslim world, okay? Whenever you go to any place where there's a killing, an assassination. So one of the most consequential assassinations of our lifetime was when Rabin was killed in Israel. And Rabin was center-right in Israel. Some, of course, they say labor, and he could claim he was center-left, but in Israel, also the politics was so right-wing that even a center-left guy is actually right-winger, etc. And he was very tough on the Palestinians, but he was considering peace. And a religious right-wing zealot murdered him and killed the peace treaty. So it's almost always the right wing in whatever country that resorts to violence and kills people because they disagree.
Yeah, I'll also point out that the Abenomics, the way he ran the monetary system and the economy in Japan is an amazing case study because they had an extremely high debt to GDP ratio with relatively low inflation, which just means that you can increase the money supply and increase public spending without experiencing runaway inflation, which is something that even mainstream economists in the United States would never dream of talking about. So he was, very left of the US in that way. And something weird happens when world leaders die, where everyone starts trying to categorize them as, was this a good guy or was this a bad guy? And usually it's a mixed bag. Usually it's not a good guy or a bad guy. And I think what's really important to take away from this is not that a good guy or a bad guy died, but that an election was happening and this was a campaign event. And this means something for democracy. And this is a destabilizing moment in Japan, and we're going to see groups in Japan get blamed for this. We're going to see supporters of Abe start blaming other marginalized groups, most likely in Japan. And we need to keep an eye on what's going on there. And JR pointed out this morning that this could inspire other extremists elsewhere to take similar action. So it's definitely a time for increased security as well.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, in the wake of the killing of Shinzo Abe, a lot of people are talking about guns and Japan, and I'm sure there are right-wingers that are using the fact that Japan had very harsh gun control legislation. It was very difficult to get a gun, saying, well, he was killed anyway, so what's the point? They're always ready to surrender opportunistically, but we do need to talk about it, how difficult it is, because I don't think most people can understand exactly how stringent that they are there, those regulations, that a different sort of approach to guns is possible. So let's talk about what it takes to get a gun and what some of the consequences are of the gun control that Japan has. So handguns are outlawed. Obtaining a shotgun or a rifle requires a full day class every 3 years, passing a shooting range test with at least 95% accuracy, a background check that includes interviews with family members and coworkers, as well as mental health evaluations, drug tests, and a report of where the guns and ammunition will be stored. They also require a medical certificate that attests to the applicant's mental health. Police look into details like potential alcohol problems or whether the individual has a history of domestic or even neighborhood disputes. An officer also will visit the applicant's home to inspect the locker that is legally required for storing a gun and should be affixed to a wall specifically. The rules specify that it must have 3 outer locks. There are extensive interviews where you have to explain exactly what it is that you need a gun for, and some do need it. There are hunters, there are people who compete in sports with firearms. They can explain that during the rigorous interviews that they do. This is obviously very different than anything, not only that we have in America, but that anyone has ever proposed for America. And as a result, the two countries have had very different results when it comes to guns. Back in 2017, there were 377,000 civilian firearms in Japan, about 0.3 per 100 people. In the US, there were 393 million guns, 120 for every 100 people. Yes, we are outnumbered by the guns here. And then perhaps as a consequence, I will speculate, we can debate, Japan had 9 firearm deaths back in 2018. The US had 39,740. More recently, just 1 person was killed by gun violence in Japan last year. The US had over 45,000 gun deaths. So a bit of a difference. Now, obviously Japan's smaller, population is smaller, so we should really correct for per capita numbers, and so we can do that. Let's go to that actually. The US has about 4.12 homicides per 100,000 individuals. Japan is down there at 0.02, the 20th. When ranked among high income countries. And by the way, just saying that it's the 20th makes it sound bad, but when you look at the actual numbers, look at the drop off from 1 to 2, from 2 to 3. I mean, it drops off a cliff. And that is complex. There's a lot of different things that are involved there, but you obviously cannot discount how rare guns are, particularly when so many of the things that are thrown out as potential explanations, things like marijuana, access to porn, violent movies, video games, all of that, are all freely available in all of these countries, including Japan.
Yeah, conservatives make such a weird argument here by saying, well, if you really want a gun, you can get one, and so we shouldn't ban gun laws. It's like, yeah, some students can be really good at picking out their phone during a test and cheating, therefore everyone should be allowed to use their notes for every exam. I mean, this kind of logic just doesn't hold. It's comical.
Yeah, I want to go back to that graph that John was referencing, because look at Canada. Canada is the third worst, and it's at 0.5. We're at 4.12. That's per capita. We're 8 times worse than Canada, which is the third worst. Okay, Japan's at 0.02. That means almost no one, and they're not last. They're 20th because the other countries do gun control, so people don't die from guns.
Yeah.
Period. Let me show you one last graph. So there's Japan at the very, very, very bottom of that graph. This is gun-related homicides compared to number of guns. So if you have very little guns, and you have very little gun homicides, you're at the very corner of that on the left-hand side, bottom left, right? You see all those countries. Hey, did you notice what happened in the upper right there? Oh, there it is. That one country, the United States. Tons of guns and tons of gun deaths.
Yeah.
Gee, is there a correlation? It's so hard to tell. The only people who tell you that it's not the guns are people who are completely ignorant or lying to you on purpose because they probably get paid by gun manufacturers. And by the way, that is almost every Republican politician. Yeah. They all know that, and they're all liars.
Yeah, and I'll close with this. If you ever hear a Republican talk about gun-free zones in America and how, as Jessica alluded to, well, gun laws only mean that the good people can't get guns, the bad people can. Well, here's an interesting test case. Japan is basically a gun-free zone. So why aren't the criminals running rampant? Why aren't they all magically just getting guns out of thin air? Because it's a gun-free zone, obviously, and criminals don't have to abide by the law, so they can just get a gun. Why hasn't that actually worked? You will never hear a Republican actually seriously respond to that point. And individually, here's a challenge. If it's so easy to just get an AR-15 off the black market in countries where they're not available, show me. Go to Japan and buy an assault weapon. I would love to see it. I think it would be a powerful demonstration of how gun control laws don't actually work. Seemingly nobody can do it. Even organized crime in Japan killed like 8 people last year or in the last couple of years. Why isn't that they're not just running wild with the assault weapons that all of the innocent Japanese can't get? It's just BS. It's all BS, and it's consequential BS.